Kamala Harris has been trying to sell her running mate as the friendly dad next door. But who's the real Tim Walz? Our friends in Minnesota give us the inside scoop. Plus, we share a gut-wrenching email from a listener, a nurse who quit her job rather than support mutilating surgeries on children in Virginia. Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candy Cushman, with our president, Victoria Cobb. Well, welcome, everyone. Glad to have you with us for another Speak Up Virginia episode. And, before we get into our discussion today on Tim Walz and who he really is and just other news out there, I did want to share just a really heart-rending email that we received from one of our listeners. And this is a nurse. Her name is Amelia, a nurse, an RN, who watched our episode on what's happening in Virginia hospitals with these gender transition procedures on kids. And her email, it really was just jaw-dropping. So I just thought I had to share it. And she gave me permission to share it with our listeners. And it says, I'm just going to start reading it now. It says, I worked at St. Francis Hospital in Richmond, Virginia on the ortho floor. A nurse who was also working on the same floor came to me and said, we need to exchange a patient. My response was, why? I already did all my assessments and recorded them on the computer. She insisted. The patient is underage and we don't have insurance on this floor to cover this patient, and I am not taking care of this patient. When I spoke to my nurse manager, she said, this patient presents as a male. This is all I had to hear. I began to cry and I could not stop. I had 20 minutes left to go on my shift. The nurse manager asked me to go with her to her office, and there she said the patient had surgery to remove her breast and presented as a male. I could not stop crying. So I'll just stop there, Victoria, and mention that I talked to Amelia on the phone. And I asked her, why did you have this immediate reaction that you were weeping over this? And it was very interesting what she said, because she said that she had formerly worked in the school system and finally reached her lifelong dream to be licensed as a nurse and went into the Catholic hospital system because she had this heart for life and for kids. And she told me I could not stop weeping because I thought this is like the last safe place that I feel is in our culture for kids.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what my reaction was, is if this is happening at Catholic hospitals, I can't even imagine what hospitals are not doing it. I mean, you would think, especially, and it just brings in these issues we've talked about so many times about conscience rights, about just the ability to find a job that doesn't conflict with your values and how hard that is getting. And so it grieves me, and I can't imagine having to firsthand experience this as a professional,
this is
healthcare professional.
People are facing at their jobs now. So I'm going to keep reading this email. So she goes on to say, you have to understand, I wanted to work at a Catholic hospital because they do not do abortions. And she lists other things that they had stances on that she agreed with. And then she explains, and now here they were removing an underage child's breast so she could become a boy. I let the nurse manager know that I would finish my shift taking care of the ortho patients only because I was contracted to care for ortho patients. When they hired me, they knew my stand on not partaking in our abortions and anything against God's Bible. I gave my 2 weeks notice because I was appalled at what the hospital had opened themselves up to. I explained that the word of God spoke to the fact God created male and female, and we had no business being God and killing a female to try and fail to create a male. I mean, that statement just kind of hits you.
Yeah, it is playing God. I mean, there's a truth there.
So she goes on. She says, the nurse manager, mentioned that I was an RN. Because I was an RN, I would have to give 4 weeks notice. I agreed to work the 4 weeks notice, but only with the ortho patients. She said that she was going to ask her Bible study to pray for me over the weekend. My response, God's word will not change over the weekend, and I will pray for you in your Bible study because evidently you are not in the same Bible. That weekend, I sent my email resigning from the position, willing to work the 4 weeks notice. On Monday, I was asked to go into the nurse manager's office, and she told me I did not need to work another day and I could go empty my locker, which I gladly did. She tried to explain to me that the girl patient had a breast reduction. My response, you can believe that if you want, but I don't. So Amelia wrapped this whole thing up by saying, this is happening everywhere. As a nation, we will pay dearly. Thanks for all you were trying to do. What a shame that the ethical doctors are the ones who will be paying the price.
This is just, It's just heartbreaking. And I have to think about this story in conjunction with the new CDC data that's come out on children struggling with this transgender issue. So the CDC is now saying there's like 3% of kids who claim transgenderism and 2% that are questioning. So this is a lot of kids.
Yeah. And really, when you dive down into the numbers, it's actually close to 1 million high school students identifying, as you said, either transgender or questioning their gender. So how can we continue to close our eyes to the fact, obviously there is a social contagion going on here, a different kind of pandemic, I would even say, and it is hurting our kids.
Oh, this is devastating. And we know social media is adding to this. I mean, these kids are seeing TikTok videos of kids transitioning. I mean, it is terrible. And then this gender affirming words, I can't even imagine how they came to calling it that, but it's just, there's nothing affirming about this. This is the opposite of that.
And it isn't affirming their gender. No, it's telling them to destroy their gender.
Right, correct. Yeah. It is the exact opposite of affirming what God has given them, and it's just devastating. And then you've got this, you can't ignore, there is a sky-high suicide rate for kids that identify as trans, but it's not, they try to make it sound like then if they don't do these surgeries, it would be worse, and that's not what the studies show. And so 26%, about a quarter of them are actually attempting suicide. So you've got these kids that are really struggling, and the surgeries, these procedures is not solving the problem. That's you're made to believe that. Don't read the deep dive on the studies. This is not the case. And it's just. I mean,
I'm concerned that you have this, I guess, at least if you count just the youth who are identifying as trans, over 500,000. Right. And 26% of them, if I'm reading this right, a quarter of them say they've attempted suicide.
Right. And that compares it. You got to compare to the regular, in normal female teens, you're looking at something like 11%, and in men, I think it's lower. Like 5%.
Really hurting our women, our girls.
Right. So it's this definitely has more. It seems to be more pronounced and more difficult on the girls.
And that might be before these procedures, but as you mentioned, even after they do the procedures.
Yes, and that's why Europe is pulling back. That's why you're seeing countries pull back, is because the studies are starting to bear out that this didn't solve anything. That going down these roads, these hospitals moving forward, is not the solution.
We are selling a bill of goods with our culture to these kids.
And there's even some documentation that they're acknowledging this is experimental, that they kind of know that, but they've been talking to parents as if this is the solution.
Yeah. We're selling lies to them. Well, so also you got to combine that with this other news we got coming out the same week that at least 14,000 minors, meaning youth under the age of 18, have received gender transition treatments or surgeries or both.
Yeah,
that's within the last 5 years.
Yeah, this is a study that just came out from the organization Do No Harm. And what they did, it's fascinating because what they did is they literally went through and looked at insurance forms. So they're looking at hospital data and saying, holy cow, this is, kids aren't just thinking about this before they're 18. They're actually moving, parents are allowing kids to move forward into transitions. And the things that you can't help but notice, I mean, of course, Virginia has tons of hospitals on this list. So we have to acknowledge this is happening here in our own state. And I went and looked for St. Francis because, of course, this email came in from, and they are on this list, acknowledging that they are doing surgeries. But also, when you think about this description that she had, where it's like breast reduction for a female to turn into a male, I hope they're coding them right. This could be a worse problem than this survey, right?
Makes you wonder.
If they turn that into the insurance and the insurance isn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, it makes me concerned. The study that we have is actually the lowest possible number of kids that we have going through this. And I have to note one other thing that just grieved my heart. One of the worst offenders in Virginia was the Children's Hospital of King's Daughters, which is out in Norfolk. And what's just sad about that, just listen to that name.
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's not about, I think of the King of Kings, right? And I think, gosh, we would never want this for children. But more than that, even just if you think about royalty, which is what it was originally, founded on, like, would they have done this to the king's daughter? No, like, we don't want this for anyone's daughters. And I just, I think about the irony of this is so painful.
That really is a profound thought, Victoria. I also think about maybe not even almost have this pipeline now, because you hear people talking about school to prison pipeline. Well, now we have, this pipeline to these surgeries, because you have the entire counseling profession, school, it's like this pipeline where if they even mention they have a struggle with this, they get on this conveyor belt.
On a path, and then there's a process. And we know that, we've talked about this very recently, the path out, kids who want something different doesn't in Virginia, and you're banned from going to counseling. So we've talked about like even their efforts to get off the pipeline. And the more important thing is not only does this ruin the child's life, but there's profit in this, and we have got to look at follow the money. Like these children, once they go down this road, are permanent medical patients. For the rest of their lives, they will be paying into our healthcare system. And so what's concerning is, I just want to make sure that we've always thought of healthcare as these are people trying to make us well, but unfortunately, there's an incentive to create permanent lifetime healthcare patients. Because look at the dollars that are behind it. The Do No Harm study has some dollars behind it, and
they cite just what they looked at was some 120 million for those procedures, but we know that's on the low end.
That's the lowest. If that's the lowest possible number, so I just all of it concerns me that we may not have the best interest of our children, and we're certainly not being careful and really ensuring that these kids are protected. We're making it almost impossible for them to even be protected.
Well, one of the children's hospitals on the Do No Harm, you mentioned the Do No Harm organization that is really exposing the medical side of this with their research. One of the children's hospitals on their worst offender list is in Minnesota, which has particular relevance to the president race now.
It sure does. Yeah, so obviously we're paying attention to our vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, and because he was governor and obviously signed a lot of bills related to this, we wanted to, I think it was important that we bring this forward. So yes.
All right. So it's Children's Minnesota Hospital, and the director of its so-called gender health program referred to using the infamous genderbread person. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will hear about how this genderbread person is used to try to, what I would say, confuse kids about the idea of gender and sexuality. But and it introduces them to the whole concept of transgenderism,
done in little kid form.
Yeah, it's just really sick, isn't it? But anyway. It was revealed that this director was using this with kids and staff, and this was exposed through a training revealed by Fox News. And this director had even made statements comparing the gender transition program to something like asthma care or diabetic care for children.
What that implies is that your own God-given sex is some kind of disease or some kind of ailment. Think about that. We've talked about this before. It's like how the abortion industry looks at pregnancy. We got to get back to what we are created with is how God intended and is natural and good.
And also that it's not invasive, a pipeline to invasive surgeries, because, taking an inhaler for asthma is not eradicating one of your organs.
Great point. This is not even on the same scale of medical procedures also.
Well, I guess we shouldn't be too surprised that this children's hospital is apparently one of Tim Walz's biggest fans, because it put an X post out there celebrating when Walz signed into law some of the most radical transgender measures that we've seen in this nation affecting kids. So we're going to just put that on the screen real quick.
I think it's really important that we look at this law because it is not just affecting their state. They are trying to affect other states, because it has been referred to as the trans refuge law. Basically, the idea that if a kid wants this surgery or procedures or whatever it is, they can come into Minnesota, and Minnesota is going to protect them from, theoretically, the laws of other states. But really, in some cases, I'm concerned they're trying to protect them from their own family who knows better for this child and trying to help this child not go down this medical pipeline for the rest of their lives.
And you're undermining states that are trying to protect kids.
The parental rights, the state's rights. There's a lot of things at play here. A state should be able to govern its own citizens, and parents should be able to help guide their child. And so when other states step in and try to interfere with this, it is incredibly dangerous. And there are people actually calling this the Kidnapping Act. It's just concerning.
Well, it is a direct attack on parental rights, because it does allow for these creation of these situations where a court can take emergency control of a child if that child has been deemed unable to get the so-called gender-affirming care.
And I think we have to note that he also signed a law banning counselors from helping adults or kids actually align their feelings with their biological sex. So if you think about this, what we've been saying here, our concern is there's not even a way off of this track. The coupling of these laws is particularly dangerous.
Yeah, and that has to do with what we talked about last week.
The counselors, you can't
freedom
even
to counsel.
you can't even go get help.
Okay, well, Victoria, why, if you're going to summarize, why is this scary to you, considering that this person that is celebrated in this post from these, transgender activists really, is running for VP? A lot of people say, well, the VP doesn't have that much power, so it's not a big deal. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm particularly concerned because I believe that campaign is trying to present him as a moderate. They're trying to make him look like he's everybody's grandfather. We've talked about that before. The image they're trying to create of him.
Grandfather.
Right. You're whatever.
No, that's accurate.
Yeah, okay. So, it's like this idea of what they're trying to create him to be ignores the kinds of laws that he has signed. And I think our sister organization, the Minnesota Family Council, actually has done a great job kind of going, no, wait, we're on the ground. We actually know what he's done. We've seen it. We need you to know that this image they're creating may not stack up. And this is the advantage of having these groups in the states on the ground, like our organization and theirs in Minnesota, is because we see it day to day. We know the details, and campaigns spin. We know that. They spin and they massage, and they try to put an image out that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, so one of their directors, Moses Batrud, recently did this interview with Family Research Council where he talked about what they really know about Tim Walz and how there's actually two Tim Walz in his opinion. So let's just listen to that for a minute.
It's almost like there are two Tim Walzes. Tim Walz is from a rural area. He was a history teacher in a mid-sized city. He served in Congress in one of Minnesota's most rural districts. While he was there, he had a reputation for moderation. He focused on veterans issues, kept his head down to some extent, didn't really make a huge splash. But when he came back to Minnesota and ran for governor in 2018, there was some politics going on within the Democratic Party in Minnesota. There's distinct factions within the Democratic Party, which other states have. But here we have, for example, Ilhan Omar on one hand and Amy Klobuchar on the other hand, to name two politicians with national profile. And Tim Walz definitely feels like more of an Amy Klobuchar type person, doesn't he? He seems like a kind of a straight shooter, straight talker type of guy who could have a conversation with Trump voters. And that's certainly what Kamala Harris hopes she will get from him. However, once he became governor, there was a distinct left turn, and we saw this in the 2020 riots when, I'm in my home in St. Paul, smelling the smoke, seeing the boarded up windows, wondering why is the governor not calling out the National Guard? Why? What's the delay here? And in fact, during that rioting, he waited 3 days while the city burned to send out the National Guard. But then, we became even more concerned after Tim Walz won re-election in 2022. After that time, we saw a huge twist to the left. We saw 3 deeply concerning bills that he signed in one day with regards to gender and abortion that I'll give you some details on. The kidnapping bill, and I see you have footage of it there. The kidnapping bill places children in emergency state custody if their parents refuse to provide them with harmful, experimental, gender-affirming health care. This is so-called treatments that the rest of the world is moving away from. Tim Walz is doubling down. He also banned so-called conversion therapy, and that threatens mental health practitioners who offer voluntary, compassionate care to young people who just want to live according to their faith in the area of gender and sexuality. Finally, and this is all in one day, in 2023, he signed a bill that would make Minnesota a safe haven for abortion doctors who face criminal charges in other states. So each of these bills puts kids in our state at risk, and it's just so hard to imagine how you can claim to be moderate once this record becomes widely known.
I think it's really important that he notes that his radical views are not just on the transgender issue. He also signed into law the same day a bill expanding abortion. So you've got a variety of things going on here, and it just seems like he's got some of the worst disregard for human life that we've seen around our country as well. Because, again, this is they're presenting him as something else to be a vice presidential candidate.
That is just incredible that he signed all of these on the same day,
transgender
and abortion expansion. And then he's on there in the presidential debate or vice presidential debate trying to act like he's a moderate. Just real quick, give us your take up on that vice presidential debate, because you didn't really have a chance to talk about that and just what you know from this. And
I'm proud of J.D. Vance for trying to get at the truth. I'm disappointed that the fact checkers, jump in when they want to, but don't jump in here. To me, this was a spot for fact checkers. Like, this was a moment where
on the abortion thing.
Yes, on the abortion thing. He's just not. He's not laying it out accurately, and so I think. I'm also glad that as many Americans tuned into that vice presidential debate as they did the presidential debate, that those numbers were similar, because normally vice presidential debates are kind of not that important. But I think in this moment, it's important to see who these folks really are. Yeah.
J.D. Vance, I think if you're objective, you have to recognize he did a brilliant job.
The liberal left acknowledged that, and they don't like his positions. I mean, they had to.
I will, even if this makes a few people mad, I will admit I was disappointed that J.D. Vance didn't take a strong, I thought he's too apologetic on the abortion stance, on the pro-life stance. However, he did an excellent job letting Tim Walz calling out Tim Walz on how extreme he really is. And to that point, I just want to listen to this Minnesota Family Council clip.
Okay.
Because they know what Tim Walz is really doing. So let's just listen to this.
But last night, Governor Walz blatantly lied about a piece of legislation he signed into law.
The statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice.
It's actually even worse than that. In signing this piece of legislation into law, what Walz did is he removed the requirement for babies born alive from botched abortions to receive life-saving care. But he went further than that. Now, no newborn that is born in Minnesota is required to have life-saving care. They are only entitled to comfort care, which aids a person on its way to death. It is not life-saving care. I'll say it again. Now under Minnesota law, and thanks to Walz, no newborns born in Minnesota are required to have life-saving care provided to them by healthcare professionals. But, here's Walz lying yet again about this.
That's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, it's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says.
So I think whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion.
To your point on the fact-checking, I can't help remembering the ABC moderators fact-checking Trump on this. Like, this isn't happening across the nation.
It's funny that it's even this issue that they fact-checked in some cases, but they don't fact-check on the other side. But, I mean, I think to summarize, let's just be clear. In in just 1 year, Walz legalized abortion until birth. He removed the restrictions for taxpayer funding, and he repealed the Infants Born Alive Act, basically the idea that if a child survives an abortion, we're going to at least administer care. And he's basically denying all of that. So it's devastating that we're not even going to give life-saving care in those cases.
And if I understand what that Minnesota video is saying, that the way the law is written, that means that there's no requirement for any newborn to be resuscitated, right? Or have life-saving care.
It's just devastating. And I see this all the time where the abortion industry is trying to go as far as they possibly can in a piece of legislation, and it almost endangers even other situations because they're desperate to just secure their unfettered right to everything. It's awful.
All right. Well, Victoria, I feel like we did cover some just super heavy topics today.
This is an intense one.
I don't want to depress people, even though sometimes it is depressing to look around what's happening in the culture, but we don't want people to feel just this heavy burden, and lose perspective. So what would your encouragement be out of all of this?
Well, my encouragement would be, now that you know some of this hard stuff about, our vice president candidate, I think you've got, the important part is we have a choice in this election. We can vote, and people need to vote. I'm really discouraged that we've seen this data. This is another study that's really very recent that's come out from George Barna, who's kind of legendary in his knowledge of evangelicals. He's done so many studies on what is a self-described evangelical, what is church attendance. I mean, he understands this group of people more than anybody else, and he basically just recently released a study, and it basically shows that a massive number of Christians who regularly attend church, so these are church attenders, are not likely to vote in November. And so this is pretty devastating. The report actually says, quote, research indicates that as many as 104 million people of faith are unlikely to vote in this upcoming election. And among those, 32 million self-identified Christians who regularly attend church won't cast ballots. So my encouragement is you got to be part of making change. You've got to actually, and I understand that people struggle sometimes, that the choices aren't as black and white as we'd want them to be. The candidates aren't as perfect as we want them to be. And when I struggle with this, what I tell people is when there's lack of clarity because there's sort of just imperfectness on both sides, I literally go to, who does Planned Parenthood want? Who does Equality Virginia want? Who are the Satanists backing? And I literally, and this sounds crazy, but I simplify this and I go, well, why do they want this person? I probably need to want the other person. And it kind of starts shaping whenever there's just any moment of lack of clarity, just look at the people who are behind all the things we've talked about, abortion and transgender surgeries and all that, and go, why do they want these candidates? Why are they aligned? Who are they aligned with?
They're pushing unfettered, no constraints at all.
Yes, and I don't want to be part of any politician that's going to be beholden to that group when they get into office. Mm-hmm. They're going to do what that group that helped put them there is going to want. I need to be on the other side of that.
And I like what Winsome Sears said at our gala, that we need to lessen evil, right?
Yes.
When we're pick the choice that is going to lessen evil, not increase it.
Yes.
But it's interesting, this data. I did see that when you kind of dived down into it. One of the big reasons, I think it was like 51% or something, if I remember correctly, that people are saying they're not going to vote in the Christian world, the people of faith, is that they feel like their one vote doesn't count. Can you just speak to that really quick? We need to help people understand.
I gotta hope they're not Virginians, because the history of Virginia elections we have so many examples where literally, we had one district that got to a tie vote, an actual tie vote of even numbers of ballots. So one vote would have tipped it, and instead we literally had a name have to be pulled out of a canister. I know people, if you haven't heard this story, it's almost hard to believe. And that one name, so they literally put both candidates into a canister because they had the exact even amount of votes. And when you pulled out that name, that was control of the House of Delegates for Virginia. You tell me one vote doesn't make it. That one vote it fell to God's providence. I don't call it chance. God, decided who got pulled out of the hat. But that tells you your one vote matters, and it matters in every election. It's not just that happened to be a House of Delegates, but we have statewide examples where the entire state of Virginia office, like the AG's office, decided by 300 some odd votes. That's one church. All right. Maybe two churches. All right, so they better not be Virginians. Yes. That's all I'm going to say.
Your vote matters, no question. So get out there, early vote. Encourage as many people as you know to get registered and to vote. And now, does the register deadline already
Nope,
pass?
They're still good.
Okay.
They can get that done.
But I think early voting, October 26th.
Yeah, you can early vote. You can go to your local registrar and show up now, and you can vote in person early. It doesn't have to be an absentee. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, I think in person starts October 26th. Correct me if
I've already voted in person.
Okay.
I've already done my job because I had to take my daughter to early vote because she's back on fall break. So I wanted to make sure we got it done. So you can go to your registrar and in person, if you don't want to do it through the mail, you can do that right now.
Okay. Encourage as many people as possible to vote. Get out there and early vote. Share resources like this podcast so people are hearing more than just what's in the mainstream media. And share the voter guides. And I'm going to end on that. If you go to familyfoundation.org, you will see a big banner for voter guide. We've got all the congressional and the Senate candidates on there on this voter guide. Make sure, that you can go to your district and share that with people. So remember, we are stronger when we speak together. We will see you next time. Thanks for joining us.